Hello, my name is Cliff Freilich. I'm the Executive Director of Cinema St. Louis, and we're the presenters of the 29th Annual Whitaker St. Louis International Film Festival. We're really pleased to have a conversation that will surround the documentary, A Place to Breathe. We're joined by director-producer Michelle Grace Steinberg and one of her co-producers, Robyn Bykofsky. And then the person who's actually going to be handling the Q&A portion of things is one of our fine film critics for The Lens, the Cinema St. Louis film blog, Joshua Ray. I am now going to exit and turn things over to Joshua to handle the conversation.
Thanks so much for having us in the festival.
Yes, I agree. I think you guys have made a wonderful, empathetic document with A Place to Breathe. One of the places I really want to start is, at the beginning and talk to Michelle. I think it's kind of your unique background of being a nutritionist and also a filmmaker that we have this product. Can you talk about the origins of that? Your work at street level in Oakland and also your past as a filmmaker and how those two converged to make this.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. So I've been the nutritionist and herbalist at Street Level Health Project, one of the clinics that you see in the film in Oakland for the last 11 years. And prior to that, I worked as well in immigrant communities as an ESL instructor. I've been a filmmaker for about 8 years, and this is sort of a unique opportunity for me to really fuse my two worlds because my life and time are sort of divided directly in half. I feel like the opportunities that I have to create change on an interpersonal level with my patients versus the opportunities I feel like I have as a filmmaker to speak to a larger audience. And so the idea for this film was probably percolating with me for many years, just seeing the incredible power and resilience that my patients and many of my colleagues bring to the table. Most of my colleagues are from the communities that we serve. And so for me, it's really important to acknowledge that I'm working cross-culturally, but for them, they're carrying many of the same experiences. And that brings so much richness to the table as far as their interactions with their patients. And so after we completed our last film and we were on the festival circuit, we were out in DC and I stumbled across a public radio international piece about Meta Health Clinic in Massachusetts and learned about sort of their long-term vision around fusing Eastern and Western medicine in helping refugee communities. They serve very different communities than we do at street level. And so it just seemed like a really great opportunity to sort of highlight these things that are happening on both coasts and really look at some best practices models of what culturally responsive medicine is. But again, as a filmmaker, that needed to be a story and not just a sort of issues doc, because I think that doesn't really convey and humanize the story as much. So it offered us an opportunity to work with people from a number of different backgrounds and experiences. And so that's kind of how the idea came up.
So Robyn, that's a good point. It's different experiences and backgrounds. We can see how Michelle got involved with this particular project because that's her work. That's her day-to-day. How about you? How did you get in here?
Well, I was fortunate to collaborate with Michelle on the previous film, Beyond Recognition, which is a short documentary about a local Indigenous Ohlone woman who and her efforts in establishing a land trust to preserve and celebrate her culture. So worked with Michelle for a few years on that project. And while I'm not specifically in healthcare, I'm in education and media arts education in communities that are often impacted by trauma or there's complex trauma, and working with young people and young adults in that. So when Michelle presented this project over 4 years ago, I think it was 4.5 years ago at this point, I knew I'd be able to work well with her. as well as know that I was like, this kind of work really interests me, and based on the communities that I've worked within. In addition, that my partner is also a therapist who focuses on trauma-informed care. So there was a lot of things that resonated personally with this. So that's kind of what struck me as an interest.
Yeah, there is quite a bit that resonated with me too, you know, not even having worked in the field, but specifically the things that the centers are doing in a holistic approach. I mean, the things that you guys are up to, you're segmented in kind of every single portion of someone's life in order to lift them up. And I'm wondering if you guys can speak to, you know, how the shape of the film came about in choosing, you know, the kind of the four groups you have. You know, you've got the Kalambayi, am I saying that right, family? And then, yeah, and so, and then you have the couple of Edgar and Yanya and Norma. And so how do you choose these specific people to follow? Because I'm sure you have a wealth of stories to dip from.
So I think that for the stories in Oakland, I was looking at the communities that we primarily serve at Street Level Health Project. And so a majority of, I see most, maybe not all, my patients in Spanish. And so a majority of the folks that we're working with are either Latinx from Mexico or from other places in Central America, or we have a huge Guatemalan population, and that population is primarily indigenous and often does not speak Spanish. So that was a really important facet for me, was that I think there's a lot of stereotypes about what folks who are coming from the South, what languages they speak, what their culture is. And so, you know, it was very important for me to include one of our community health workers and interpreters, Norma, as a main character, to really talk about that experience being Guatemalan and not speaking Spanish as a first language, but speaking her Mayan language of mom. And then with Edgar and Shania, it was really an opportunity to look at the experience of young people on DACA who want to actually do work helping their own communities, and the struggles that they face, you know, having a very different life, having grown up here, but now really struggling to have the same opportunities based on their immigration status. And so out here, we're dealing primarily with folks who were either undocumented or at one point, or are asylum seekers. On the East Coast, the Meta Health Center is primarily refugee focused, though they do have a diversity of communities as well. And that health center was initially founded to meet the needs of the extremely large Cambodian community in Lowell, Massachusetts, that came over after the Khmer Rouge genocide. And so it was important to us that there be characters that represented that piece of the story. But then, you know, the center has morphed in so many ways to serve a diversity of immigrants from around the world. And so at this moment, you know, capturing the experience of the Kalambayi family from Democratic Republic of Congo became an opportunity because they had just arrived at the point that we started. And so in many ways, sort of, I think there's a lot of factors for us around who holds what space in the film, but it offered us an opportunity to humanize people's stories regardless of their immigration status, because while those confines of whether you're a refugee, whether you're undocumented, whether you have DACA, you know, that has a huge impact on your opportunities and experiences, but it doesn't change who you are as a human. And so really the opportunity for people to see across those lines, you know, it was intentional that we did not spend a large portion of the film focusing on those distinctions, but instead acknowledging them and then focusing on the people themselves. I would say, you know, one other, when I think of something that's trying to be representative of many different perspectives, I often notice what's missing. And so for us, what's definitely missing is the perspective of a Muslim immigrant. And that was something that, you know, the communities that are currently at Meta Health Center at that time were primarily from Iraq and Syria, if we would have brought in that story. And we tried to, but because of the precarity of those communities, there was nobody who felt comfortable speaking out publicly. So that was that particular omission. But yeah, I mean, it was a process also. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware of, that all documentary filmmakers are aware of, it can be really grueling to be in a documentary and have us following your life for several years. And so it was also a question of who was available for that. And particularly as the film really looks at people's experiences of trauma, that makes that even a bigger demand in a lot of ways, the kind of personal sharing that people needed to do. And then one other layer I would add for how we think about the space each of the characters holds is that they're each at different stages of their healing process. So that some people are patients, some people had been patients and are now, you know, the ones supporting their communities. That journey is not linear, but, you know, rather happens in circular ways, because people's trauma doesn't disappear. What changes is how you hold it. And so yeah, I think that was another factor as well.
You know, talking about, you know, that trauma, you do this really kind of miraculous thing in animating the origin source of that. And I'm wondering why animation? Why not direct address? I have an idea of why. I think there is some powerful empathy in seeing that, and seeing that kind of remove that you have with animation. But I'm wondering if either of you can speak to that choice that you made.
I'll speak to it first and then turn it over to Robyn to elaborate. So I think all along I sort of had a vision for wanting to animate those sections, because there can be something very challenging for both the viewer and the speaker in having someone on camera when they're talking about very deep trauma. And I think in some ways, it can initially build a connection, but I think it can also, the viewer can shut down at some point in seeing someone recount something like a rape or something like the death of a loved one. And so for me, I felt like animation offered an opportunity to create a space that could be symbolic, a space that could extend the person's story in different ways, as well as the idea that memory in our story needed its own particular time and space. So you'll notice the only parts that are animated are the parts that take place in people's homelands. And that was very intentional, because I think that when you come here, that those memories carry a particular space that looks and feels very different than what you're experiencing on the day-to-day here. And so we wanted to create an opportunity for that to be expressed in the film.
Yeah, and I think too, just, you know, with all the intention that went into doing the animation, something that kind of came up with me and talking about it with a colleague and friend of mine, was also like, it's really a unique and powerful way to engage viewers to people's story in a way that isn't seeing it as other. And it's almost because it takes you're not seeing the person themselves, but you're able to engage in a different way and maybe be able to see similarities or be able to somehow connect in a different way than you would seeing the person speak. Though, with that being said, with the animation, like for us, it was extremely important to have the people whose stories we were animating to get their approval of it, because it's a whole other level of like, here's this drawing, a representation of you, and they had to feel comfortable about it, because it's not only just their story they're sharing, this is also then an interpretation visually of themselves and their experience. So that was something that was really important. And we were really fortunate to work with two unbelievably talented women who are, one is based in Berlin and the other is based in Paris, and to work with us, and that they really understood the importance of that, and that it would take a little longer um, in the process of the creation process of it. And what I think, we came up with, like, we are just a beautiful animation and story that just adds a new level to the depth of the film.
Yeah, there's a universality when it's, drawn images. You're able to, if not identify, understand the specificity within that, and there's so many stories across the film, from, the people coming over after Khmer Rouge. The one that really, really got to me is the one that you're able to track throughout the film is the unnamed, undocumented woman who Norma works with, and the ankle bracelet, and just the kind of physical toll and the emotional toll that it takes on there. I don't see anyone being able to watch that and just, throw their hands up and say, well, blah, blah, blah. So I'm really wondering, when you have something like that that really elicits that empathy, what's the response you're looking for from an audience? Are you wanting to kind of hold that in a remove and look at the whole situation, or really looking for the empathy there?
The empathy. I think that because I'm a healthcare provider, because she was one of my patients, and I think that experience, was really powerful, and I wanted other people to be able to share that experience of sitting in a room and hearing the experience that somebody is having based on this, this thing being attached to their leg that is so inherently dehumanizing. And let me figure out the best way to say this. So I think that, to give a little context for the viewer, we at our clinic were seeing a number of women, particularly from Guatemala, but from other countries, coming in with those ankle monitors under the Obama administration. So basically, the situation was that a lot of the detention centers were not set up for parents and children. So women were frequently, if they had children, being released with this huge tracking device on them. And that tracking device, as you see in the film, causes physical harm. It also causes emotional damage. And yet, under Trump, we have seen less of them. But, that's a sad fact, because what it means is that people are being deported immediately. So it's a complicated situation. Along the way, I was, of course, consulting with immigration attorneys and, other folks to make sure that nothing in the film would cause any potential harm to anybody participating. And that's, I'm not even sure that I know how to wrap my head. At some point, he and I both just acknowledged, like, the film is portraying how challenging and dehumanizing that particular method of engaging somebody who's arrived here looking for asylum is. But functionally, the alternative at that moment was that people were just being deported instead, which, and I sort of had to just say to myself, I'm just showing what's happening. I'm not making a statement to say that I would, that this alternative is somehow better. I mean, for me, the alternative is that we're not treating people like that. We are a country that ought to be granting asylum, and that asylum should not come at the cost of your health and dignity. But so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that really speaks to your question, but I think I want both those things, right? I think I want people to feel that connection with her experience, and then be able to take a step back and extrapolate it into the larger picture of this particular moment and policy situation that we're in,
Yeah, I think that it's successful in doing so, in holding both of those things. And as a document for right now, I think I have a stat. Trump administration's cut the number of refugees allowed in the United States by 80%. Canada supplanted us as the #1 spot for refugees. And I think something like this, it kind of gives you that experience, not necessarily, a universal one, but the specificities of all of their stories and what they're going through. It's so difficult. And when you read a statistic like I just rattled off, what do you say to someone that's discouraged about the whole situation?
It's interesting because I was just on teaching a class this morning that just watched the film and their future healthcare providers, and that question sort of permeated everything, right? Is how do we find hope in this moment where there seems to be so little hope? We have Amy Coney Barrett being, we have the election, and I have to say that we find hope because we look at stories like this and we say to ourselves, for many of us, and certainly not all, but for many people who grew up in this country, there can be a certain level of privilege and a certain level of distance from some of the struggles that people experience, and that's a certain level of distance from some of the struggles people experience within this country, but let alone that are experienced elsewhere. And so when I look at the Columbine family, for instance, and what they went through, I have never met a more hopeful group of people in my life. So I think one thing we do is look at the fact that people who have been through some of the most horrific trauma have ways of coming to terms with a future and with hope. And so that means that the rest of us need to. That means that the rest of us need to orient ourselves to saying, okay, well, if this is our new reality, how are we going to fight for justice within it? Because we don't really have a choice. I think backing away from it and being hopeless and depressed is really in some ways a privilege, and that's not a privilege we have right now. And so I look for inspiration from a lot of these stories of people who have overcome these struggles and figured out ways to situate their own healing within the context of their community and bring that healing back to others.
Yeah.
Well, and just to add real quick to that, I feel like in the making of the film, it was really intentional of us to have showing the hope and to walk away from the film with this sense of hope. And responses that I've gotten from people who've watched it, that was something like that they really appreciated. The fact was like, here's an example of people healing and holding on to hope, but not just like inactively, but very actively, and going, and specifically in the case of this film, going into healthcare as a means for self-healing, healing in individual and helping heal communities. So that was something that was really important to us as making the film.
I think that also as filmmakers working cross-culturally, it's not my place to show people as victims. It's not my place to show, I actually really have a problem with films that are sort of made by white folks wanting to like show this horrible thing, but doesn't show any of the power and resilience that actually comes from communities themselves. And so it's sort of a theme throughout my work that I see a lot of amazing people doing a lot of amazing things in their own communities. And if I'm having the privilege of being a storyteller in that moment, then I feel like my responsibility is to echo and share that inspiration and power that comes from them. I would say another deliberate choice we made was, so the transition into Trump during the course of when the film was made, we really struggled with how much do we want to situate this film in a very specific context. Do we want to show news bits? Do we want to show statistics? Do we want to show things like that? And, in editing, I made the decision that I didn't, because we were being bombarded by this adrenaline-filled moment where every day we wake up and something stupid is happening. And I didn't feel like we needed to create more space to spotlight that. What we were trying to show is that life goes on regardless, and what sort of coping mechanisms do people have in the midst of that, because I think that that's something that everybody in this country can learn from, you know?
Yeah, ultimately, that's what the film does, is it kind of uplifts you because these people are resilient, unbreakable, even in the face of this crazy adversity. And I think it is just a wonderful project that just shows you the whole life cycle, like you were saying, Michelle, of these people and their lives and what it must be like for them to come in either as a refugee and undocumented worker. Ultimately, yeah, there's quite a bit of uplift. I'm wondering what the future holds for the two of you and this particular project, and also at the centers. And if you can give us some more information about the centers where our audience can take a look and how they might be even able to help locally.
Yeah. So I think we're in the process right now. And Robyn can maybe elaborate on this. Like, we could have never imagined what it would mean to release a film during COVID, and like work for 4 years on this thing, and then like literally we were finishing up color and sound as COVID started. The Wexner Center for the Arts had provided us with an artist residency. And so the first part of that, we were able to go out there. And by the time we were going to fly out for finishing, we couldn't leave. And so I think that we've really had to recalibrate what sorts of avenues would we want to get the film out in. I mean, I think we always felt like its longest legs will be within medical schools and within clinics and policy change, because we would like to really further the work of community health workers, of what it means to have people from their own communities doing healthcare work, and of what culturally responsive integrative care looks like. And so luckily those avenues, as I said, I was doing a workshop this morning about that. And so getting it into those settings and having these conversations is certainly a main goal. We were lucky to have it screened for a 2-week theatrical run at the Roxy Theater online, which hopefully when they reopen, we'll be able to have it there. But we definitely hope to get it into other theaters around the country. And I think we just signed, actually, we're just launching this in a few days with an educational distributor. Good Docs is picking up the film. And so, yeah, but as far as the health clinics, again, everything has shifted, right? So in many ways for Street Level, the center of our world is having this community space and having this place for people to interact with each other. And that's not possible right now. So, I'm seeing all of my patients by phone. I'm doing deliveries. My coworkers have morphed. We're doing food bags. We're doing other kinds of support services. Lowell Community Health Center is making similar accommodations. So I don't know what the future of that is going to look like. I hope that we'll be able to reopen in the ways that we all knew previously. I think that if people want to support, so I definitely strongly encourage, I'm not sure who the local resources doing similar work in immigrant and refugee communities would be in St. Louis, but I definitely am all for people supporting their local endeavors. So encourage people, if they are moved by the film, to look into who's doing that work locally in St. Louis and how they can support. You can go to streetlevelhealthproject.org for more information about our clinic. You can go to Lowell Community Health Center's Meta Health Center for information about their clinic. And for information about the film, go to underexposedfilms.com or aplacetobreathefilm.com. And if you're interested in programming it for any kind of educational institution, museum, situation like that, please go to Good Docs. They have us up. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I know for me personally, I think that because of the current health crisis, my responsibility is to look at how we can use this film as a document to change disparities and inequity in healthcare. And so I'm not really programming myself towards a next film until I can really commit to seeing what the impact can be from this project, because it's so needed right now.
Well, thank you both for the incredible work that you're doing, and thank you for the documentary and documenting these lives so that we can share in them and hopefully take some action and understand the situation better. Again, A Place to Breathe. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Robyn. Really excellent work.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks to Cliff and the entire St. Louis Film Festival. I hope the festival goes great online.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.